Over the past several weeks, a series of events has transpired that's raised serious questions about the state of the UK's criminal justice system. These events touch on public safety, government accountability, and the basic expectation that when a court sentences an individual to prison, that sentence is actually carried out. Yet, what we're seeing is a system under growing strain, repeated administrative failures, and leadership struggling to maintain public confidence. At the centre of this crisis is the accidental release of prisoners, including individuals convicted of serious offences. This issue moved from an internal administrative concern to a national controversy after a sequence of high-profile cases, including the mistaken release of Hadush Kebatu from HMP Chelmsford, and then shortly afterwards, the mistaken release of another foreign national offender from HMP Wandsworth. To provide context, the Epping Hotel protests were triggered by the crimes of Hadush Kebatu, and his release sent shockwaves across the nation. These events would be concerning on their own, but what has amplified public alarm is the revelation that these are not isolated incidents. New data shows that accidental prisoner releases are occurring far more frequently than many realised. The release of Hadush Kebatu triggered a police manhunt, prompting Justice Secretary David Lammy to hold a media briefing on the situation.
Well, I'm appalled and livid on behalf of the public that Kebatu is at large. He should be deported back to Ethiopia after the sexual assaults that he's committed. And of course, there is now a manhunt with Essex Police, the Metropolitan Police, and British Transport Police looking for him.
The situation with Kebatu became the catalyst for this national crisis. Kebatu was already a high-profile offender due to the crimes that sparked the Epping Hotel protests, making his subsequent erroneous release all the more damaging. His case is a perfect storm of systemic failure. Not only was he a convicted criminal whose initial crimes had already alarmed the public, but the state then failed to securely carry out his sentence. His erroneous release from HMP Chelmsford transformed an administrative error into a public safety emergency, necessitating a resource-intensive police manhunt and forcing a high-level response from the Justice Secretary himself. In doing so, Kebatu's case exposed a disturbing pattern, moving the conversation from a single shocking mistake to a revelation of a much broader, more frequent institutional problem. According to recent government figures, a total of 91 prisoners were freed by mistake between April and October this year.
New data my department published today shows that from April to the end of October this year, there were 91 releases in error from prison.
91 prisoners in England and Wales were mistakenly released between April and October of this year alone. The number of accidental releases has been increasing in recent years. A total of 262 prisoners in England and Wales were freed by mistake in the 12 months to March, according to the latest annual figures, up 128% from 115% the previous year. The scale of the issue is significant, and the consequences are not abstract. They directly affect communities, victims, and people's sense of security. This has placed the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, under intense scrutiny. The situation came to national attention in the House of Commons when Lammy stood in for Prime Minister Keir Starmer during Prime Minister's questions. During the exchange with Conservative MP James Cartledge, James asked Lammy multiple times whether any additional convicted offenders had been mistakenly released.
Can he reassure the House that since Kebatu was released, no other asylum-seeking offender has been accidentally let out of prison?
The question was straightforward, yet the response was not. Instead of providing clarity, Lammy responded with visible frustration, deflection, and criticism of the previous government rather than addressing the question directly. James Cartledge repeated the same question 5 more times, and with each repetition, David Lammy's frustration became more and more visible. Eventually, Lammy lost his patience and said this.
Can he reassure the House that since Kebatu was released, no other asylum-seeking offender has been accidentally let out of prison? It's a clear question. Can he give an answer?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Get a grip, man. I know I'm the Justice Secretary. That's why I'm at the dispatch box, also as Deputy Prime Minister. We know that. I'm not going to pray in aid. Dame Anne Owens is a former Deputy Commissioner in London, head of the NCA. It is for her to get to the bottom of that work. Of course, we know that there have been spikes since 2021 under his watch. When did he come to this House and apologise?
However, what made the exchange particularly controversial is that Lammy had already been informed the night before that an additional offender had indeed been released in error. He had prepared a statement in his briefing documents, yet he didn't disclose this information during the questioning. By the end of the exchange, it appeared to have been a disastrous Prime Minister's questions for James Cartledge, with David Lammy clearly getting the upper hand. Because at the time of the PMQs, news hadn't broken alerting the public that an additional offender had indeed been released in error. So James Cartledge's line of questioning just appeared strange. However, at 12:30, the news broke publicly, which allowed Cartledge to return to the chamber and raise a point of order, which shocked David Lammy. Here is how the events transpired.
The Telegraph are reporting that a police manhunt has been launched for a second asylum seeker mistakenly freed from prison. The question is, Mr. Speaker, can you advise me on how I can ask the Justice Secretary whether he was aware of this when I asked him about it repeatedly in Prime Minister's question?
So although David Lammy seemed to have performed well for most of PMQs, James Cartledge ultimately came out on top. It then became clear why he had kept repeating the same question throughout. He'd been setting Lammy up all along. The sequence of events shifted the narrative from a question of administrative mistakes to a question of ministerial accountability. Why was the information not disclosed in the chamber? Why was the public not informed sooner? And what does this say about the government is managing a crisis that directly affects crime and public confidence? To understand how such mistakes are happening, we must examine the state of the prison and court system more broadly. Mark Fairhurst, the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association, explained in a recent interview that the issue stems from several deep-rooted structural problems. These include outdated IT systems, administrative processes that still rely on pen and paper, and critically, a severe lack of staff training. In some cases, a prison officer may be promoted into a role responsible for discharging inmates within days without formal preparation. When processes depend heavily on manual calculations and experience-based judgment, human error becomes far more likely.
I think there's several facets to this. I think first and foremost, our internal IT structures are not fit for purpose. We still work off antiquated systems using pen and paper to calculate and recalculate prison sentences. That needs to be digitalised.
Fairhurst noticed that many of these issues didn't arise overnight. He pointed to over a decade of reduced staffing levels, budget constraints, and cuts to prison infrastructure and resources. The frontline officers working in prisons are, in many cases, doing their best in a system that has not been adequately modernised, staffed, or supported. This context is important because it explains the operational causes behind the mistakes, but it doesn't reduce their seriousness. The public expects systems that handle prison sentences to function reliably. When they do not, trust erodes. This is where political responsibility becomes central. During the Commons statement following the release of the new figures, David Lammy argued that the current situation is a result of a system under horrendous strain, claiming that the government inherited a crisis. He pointed to the reduction of prison officers between 2010 and 2017 and stated that such cuts inevitably lead to operational failures. To address the situation, Lammy's announced several measures, including increasing funding for new technology, a team of data specialists to identify systemic vulnerabilities, improved coordination between prisons and courts, and new standardised discharge protocols. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick stated that Lammy was presiding over a complete and utter farce, and highlighted that confusion from the government's early release scheme may have contributed to operational instability. This scheme, introduced due to overcrowding, allows certain inmates to be released after serving only 40% of their sentence instead of 50%. Jenrick argued that this change has created additional complexity at a time when the system is already overstretched. Meanwhile, others have suggested the issue is part of a much wider challenge facing the criminal justice system. It's not simply about accidental releases, it's about what the public sees and experiences daily. Rising levels of antisocial behaviour, increased shop theft, concerns about knife crime and longer delays in the court system all contributed to a sense that law and order is under pressure. For many people, this crisis does not exist in isolation. It feels connected to events happening in our own communities. When news breaks that convicted offenders have been mistakenly released, it reinforces a perception that the system is not functioning as it should. To add to this, police chiefs warn of a crime surge if Labour's plans pass. As hunt for mistakenly released prisoners continues, senior officers have said measures proposed under the government's sentencing bill could see up to a 6% rise in crime in the immediate aftermath should the plans become law. Labour's plans to send fewer offenders to prison will result in an extra 400,000 crimes in the first year, police leaders have claimed. The government's new crime and sentencing bill will effectively see short custodial sentences scrapped and replaced with community resolutions and rehabilitation programs. It will mean that some sex offenders, violent criminals, burglars and shoplifters are likely to avoid prison or be released early. The plans, which follow recommendations from David Lammy, the former Tory Justice Secretary, are intended to reduce reoffending rates in the medium and long term. But detailed modelling based on data from the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice suggests the proposal could result in a 6% spike in overall offences in the first year, which could mean 396,000 additional recorded crimes. Gavin Stevens, head of the National Police Chiefs Council, said police would need extra support and funding to mitigate the increased short-term risks to the public. Police chiefs are asking the government for an extra £400 million to manage the extra demand and also to support victims of crime, including those who have suffered sexual violence and domestic abuse. There's also a political dimension to consider. The government has made commitments to rebuild trust, restore stability, and ensure competence. Issues in the criminal justice system test these commitments. Leadership during times of operational difficulty matters, not only in the decisions made, but in how openly and effectively the situation is communicated. When communication appears defensive, dismissive, or incomplete, confidence weakens further. This is why the moment in the Commons resonated so strongly. The issue was not merely the mistake, but the failure to acknowledge it transparently. Justice Secretary David Lammy later explained why he hadn't informed the Commons, even though he was aware that other prisoners had been released. He said the following to Channel 4 News.
I first found out about this on Wednesday morning. I was in the department, both learning from officials, but also preparing for Prime Minister's questions. At the dispatch box, I did not have all of the detail. That detail was actually released just later, after I had finished at Prime Minister's questions. I took the judgment that it is important when updating the House and the country about serious matters like this that you have all of the detail. I was not equipped with all of the detail, and the danger is that you end up misleading the House and the general public. So that is the judgment I took. I think it's the right judgment.
David Lammy has said he was not equipped with all facts about a mistaken prisoner release when he appeared at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. The Justice Secretary insisted he was right not to provide details to MPs about the accidental release of Ibrahim Kaddour Sharif when he did not yet have the full information. While Lammy defended his decision as an effort to avoid giving incomplete or inaccurate details, critics argue that his silence in the chamber has only deepened public concern about transparency and accountability at the top of government. The broader context, however, paints an even more troubling picture. The accidental release of prisoners is no longer an isolated administrative mishap. It has become a recurring failure that speaks to the strain on the UK's criminal justice system. According to the statistics published in July, 262 prisoners were released in error in the 12 months to March 2025, a 128% increase from 115 the previous year. Each number in that statistic represents not just a procedural lapse, but a real risk to public safety and confidence. Ultimately, the test facing the government is not only whether it can fix the system, but whether it can rebuild trust with the public.